Chapter 6. Elizabeth. Elizabeth could not contain her excitement as she raced out of the general store with the ticket in her hand. It had taken 10 days, 10 long, grueling days. But finally she had received not only word from Mr. Baxter, but also a ticket, which meant she could be out of here tomorrow at the very latest. Maybe she would even get lucky and there would be a train leaving tonight. She tucked the ticket in her pocket and ran towards the train station, hoping that she could get there and back to the saloon before she was missed. It was her afternoon off, but no girl got the evening off, and if she wasn't back before the start of shift, she would be in trouble. She didn't want Jacob getting wind of her plan before she was gone. "Please, is there a train to Texas today?" she asked, her words halting as she tried to catch her breath. The man behind the booth raised his eyebrows at her. "We do have one train leaving in an hour." An hour? Would it be enough time? Could she make it to her room, pack, and disappear without being seen in that time? She would have to. There was no way she could wait until tomorrow. She had a feeling that if she did, something would keep her from being able to leave. "I'll take it. Thank you." She handed the open ticket to the clerk in exchange for the scheduled ticket and looked toward the bustling platform. "Where will I go to catch the train?" "The train will depart from platform 2, just over there." The clerk pointed, and following his finger, Elizabeth saw small square boxes with numbers hanging from the ceiling. Number 2 was on the far side. "Thank you." She tucked the ticket he extended her into her pocket and then made her way back toward the saloon. Sneaking in the back entrance, she climbed the stairs quietly, stepping over the nasty 4th step that always groaned when you stepped on it, and then threw as many items as she could into her bag. There would be things left behind, but she couldn't think about them now. Items could be replaced. All that mattered now was getting out of here while she could. "Are you going somewhere?" Elizabeth glanced up to see Mary standing in her doorway. She bit the inside of her lip. Mary had always been nice to her, but could she trust her? The woman didn't look angry, merely curious. So deciding she didn't have much of an option, Elizabeth issued a silent prayer that Mary wouldn't turn her in, or at least not until she could get on the train, and answered, "I am. I can't stay here. This was never what my father planned for me, so I'm leaving town." Mary's brow lifted slightly. "Where will you go?" Elizabeth shook her head. "I don't know exactly. I'm going to let it be an adventure." That wasn't exactly true. She had the name of where she was going, but even though she was fairly certain Mary wouldn't squeal on her, she wanted to protect her from having any concrete information she could share. For a second, Mary just stared at her, and Elizabeth was sure the woman was going to block the door and holler for Luther. But finally she smiled, stepped in to give Elizabeth a hug, and wished her luck. "I hope you find something better than this. Come with me." Elizabeth didn't know why the words tumbled from her mouth, other than she could see the sadness in her friend's eyes. Still, it was a ridiculous offer. She didn't have a ticket for Mary. But maybe she could exchange her ticket for 2 tickets somewhere closer. It might take her longer to get to her destination, but it would be worth it to see her friend get out as well. Mary merely smiled sadly and shook her head. "I would love to, but I can't. There's nowhere for me to go, and I'm too old to marry and start over." "No, you're not. Look, out west there are more men than women. I'm sure you could find a good man who would marry you. And if not, you could stay with me." "No, my place is here. I don't know anything other than working for Jacob and Luther. But you go. Get out while you can." Elizabeth wanted to argue with her, but there was no time. She wanted Mary to get out as well, but if the woman didn't want it for herself yet, there really was nothing Elizabeth could do. She pulled the woman close once more. "I'll pray for you. And if you do ever leave, maybe we can reunite one day." "Maybe. Now you better get out of here. It's almost time for the evening shift to begin, and Luther will be looking for you. I'll tell him you're sick to buy you some time." That excuse wouldn't buy much time. Luther didn't believe an illness should keep you from working, but Elizabeth looked at her friend a moment longer, wishing there was something else she could say to get the woman to go with her. "Thank you," she said instead, knowing it was no use. She flashed a small wave and then hurried back down the stairs and out of the building. If she ever had a chance, she'd come back for Mary, she promised herself. The woman might not think she did, but Elizabeth knew she deserved a better opportunity. As soon as she stepped outside, she glanced around. Though the sun shone warmly on her, there was a cold dread on her spine that someone was watching. That Luther knew what she was doing and would stop her before she could get on the train, or that Jacob had seen her at the train station and would be waiting for her when she arrived again. She shook her head to clear the negative thoughts, and, clutching her bag to her chest, she hurried as quickly as she could toward the train station, glancing every few seconds to the left and right to see if anyone was following her. When she reached the station and stepped into the bustling crowd, she relaxed slightly, but only slightly. 20 minutes still remained before the train left, and until she was seated and the train was pulling out of the station, she knew she wouldn't rest easy. Hurrying to platform 2, she joined the crowd boarding the train. "Do you have a bag to check, miss?" "Excuse me?" She turned to see a man in a dark red uniform staring at her. "A bag? Do you have a bag to check?" She clutched her bag tighter to her chest. "No, only this one. Am I allowed to keep it with me?" He smiled. "Of course, miss. Let me help you aboard." "Do you need to see my ticket?" She shifted the bag into one arm so she could reach for the paper that represented her freedom. "No, miss. The conductor will take that on the train." "Oh, okay. Thank you." She allowed him to help her step into the train car, and then she hurried to find a seat. She chose one near the window so she could see not only the sights as they traveled, but so she could watch for any sign of Luther or Jacob before they left the station. Not that she had any idea what she would do if she did see them. Her eyes scanned every person in the crowd, her heart beating loudly in her chest. How much longer until they departed? She glanced around for a clock, but there was none on the train. Finally, she heard a voice announcing the final boarding call, and her heart began to relax. She was going to make it. She was going to get out. "Is this seat taken?" Elizabeth glanced up to see an elderly woman looking down at her. She shook her head, and the woman sat down. "Thank you. I feel like I've been on my feet all day. Where are you headed, my dear?" "West." Though the woman seemed harmless, Elizabeth had no idea who she was, or if she might be connected to Luther or Jacob. The woman smiled as if she understood Elizabeth's hesitation. "I am too. I was attending my daughter's wedding in Chicago, but now I'm headed back to my home in Texas." That must be hard having her so far away. Elizabeth had no children yet, but she could imagine. The woman nodded. "It is, but she always dreamed big, and small-town life didn't suit her. Even though I miss her terribly, I'm glad she's happy. What about you? Are you married?" Elizabeth paused as she considered how much to say. It was doubtful this woman knew Luther or Jacob, but Jacob seemed to have his hands in everything. What if he was connected to the daughter, or the daughter's new husband? But this woman was going back home. Any word she could send to her daughter would take days, if not weeks. And why would she discuss a stranger on a train anyway? Surely the woman was just being friendly. "I'm not, currently, but I'm hoping to soon. I've had trouble finding a man who will handle my independence." The woman chuckled. "I understand that. I have an independent streak, too. Thankfully, I found a man who was willing to put up with me. I have no doubt that you will also." "How long will it take us to get there?" The older woman's brow lifted, as if putting together that this was Elizabeth's first voyage that direction. "It's a 2-day trip from here to North Texas. Of course, then you'll have to take a stagecoach to your final destination, unless you're going to a town on the line." Elizabeth wasn't sure exactly where Sage Creek was in Texas, but she rather doubted it was a town on the line. She pulled her ticket out and looked down at the destination city, Amarillo. She supposed she'd be asking around when she arrived there about how to get to Sage Creek. At least it would give her time to send word to Mr. Baxter about her arrival as well. Tucking her ticket back into her pocket, she looked back up at her companion and smiled. "Thank you. Can you tell me about life out west? Do you work?" The woman looked as if she was going to ask Elizabeth more about her destination, but then decided against it. "Life out west isn't for everyone, but I enjoy it. My husband is a rancher, so I help him with that, as well as taking care of the house. But I am also employed for myself." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You are? What do you do?" She'd heard of a few women opening stores in the East, but only recently, and she doubted any woman held a business in the much less developed West. "I'm a seamstress. I don't own a shop or anything, but women bring their ideas to me, and I make them dresses. It doesn't bring in much money, but it's something that's mine." A tiny gasp flitted from Elizabeth's throat before she could stop it. "A seamstress? That's a dream of mine, but I didn't think it was possible as most women make their own clothes." The woman nodded. "That is true, but there is a small change occurring. With women taking on more teaching positions and helping their husbands, they have less time to make their own clothing. In Chicago, it's happening even faster. I have orders from several of my daughter's friends." Wow, I had closed myself off to the possibility. For a moment, Elizabeth allowed her mind to wander to the idea of having her own store once again. The woman placed a hand on her arm. "Never close yourself off to possibility. God has a plan for your life, and sometimes it even matches your own." Elizabeth nodded. She knew that God's plan was always best. She just wasn't sure if she was following God's plan, or her own, currently. In fact, she didn't know how any of this, losing her father, being forced to work for Jacob, running away, fit into God's plan, but she would trust that it did.